Iraq's first election since the defeat of Daesh. The people vote for change, but will it bring the stability so desperately needed? I'm Imran Garda, and today's newsmaker is Muqtada Al-sadr. He may not become Iraq's next prime minister, but Muqtada Al-sadr could be the man to decide who does. In an election result few expected, the Shia cleric and his coalition stormed to a commanding lead, winning the most seats in parliament. Incumbent Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi, who many saw as the frontrunner, did poorly. That's despite his government's defeat of Daesh. But while this looks like a commanding victory for Sadr, the turnout was the worst since the fall of Saddam, a sign maybe the Iraqi people were fed up with the incumbents. And Muqtada Al-sadr certainly offers something different. So could he and his coalition be the ones to finally bring stability to Iraq? That debate in a moment, but first here's Shoaib Hassan.
He was the face of Iraq's resistance to US occupation after 2003 and regarded by American generals as enemy number one. That was until the rise of Daesh. Now, nationalist Shia cleric Muqtada Al-sadr is back, his Sairun alliance having stormed to the lead in Saturday's elections with almost all the ballots counted.
Iraq has gone through difficult times that sent people into a panic, disturbed all the people, and was a source of discomfort for all except for our common enemy, America, Israel, and Britain. Therefore, repeat after me, no, no America.
Sadr's Sairun coalition is one of the 6 major alliances that contested the parliamentary elections. Coming in second is the pro-Iran Fatah coalition led by Hadi al-Amiri, head of the Shia paramilitary Popular Mobilization Units, while the pre-election favorite and Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi's Nasser coalition is third. But less than half of Iraq's 18.2 million registered voters cast their ballots, a record low turnout. Candidates from 88 political parties were contesting and 329 seats were up for grabs. The Sairun alliance won 54 of those, Fatah has 47, and the ruling Nasser coalition has had to settle for just 42 seats. Sadr's apparent victory can be seen as a setback for US influence, but maybe even more of a defeat for Iran. Tehran's suspected rule by proxy may have been a deciding electoral factor. Sadr is the only prominent Shia political leader who has resisted its grip on the country.
Iran is working for its own interest. If it supports any party or bloc, it works for its own interest and nothing else. Iraq should get out of being used as a backyard to others, whether Saudi Arabia, Iran, United Arab Emirates or Qatar, or to any other neighboring or non-neighboring country. I find that Muqtada Al-sadr is trying to get Iraq away from such governments who want Iraq to be their backyard.
But an Iraq free from foreign influence seems unlikely, as Sadr has been cozying up to Saudi Arabia. It does mean, though, that Iran's regional influence has taken yet another hit. After Israel bombed its military bases in Syria and US President Donald Trump tore up the nuclear deal and reimposed sanctions, now, defeat for Iran's allies across its border is something its leaders have said they won't put up with. So, will Sadr be able to form a more representative government? And will it be able to bring stability to Iraq? Shoaib Hassan, the Newsmakers.
Well, to get more on this, I'm joined now from The Hague by Hisham Al-Alawi. He's Iraq's ambassador to the Netherlands. Sir, a pleasure having you on the Newsmakers. Thank you very much for joining us. The election results have been a surprise to many people around the world as they've been coming through. And one of the main questions, one of the immediate questions is how bad does this government have to be that it defeated Daesh, one of the greatest threats to the entire world, not too long ago, yet only 45% of eligible voters voted, and those that did vote voted for change.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to share our views with you today. Well, there are different ways of looking at the election results. Obviously, 44.5% is significantly less than the turnout that we had in the elections in 2014, 10, and at the end of 2015. But if you take into account the huge legacy that the current government had to deal with, and the campaign, the negative campaign that was that focused on calling on boycotting the elections, then 44.5% is not a bad turnout, especially if you take also into account that we continue to have a problem with internally displaced and some of the citizens also being in neighboring countries.
For those who did very well, let me, for example, look at Muqtada Al-Sadr, the Sadrists, and the Communists. They campaigned on an anti-corruption platform, so clearly that resonated with millions of Iraqis. Does that suggest that your government is very corrupt?
Well, certainly the current government has proved to be more serious about fighting corruption. The Prime Minister has repeatedly said that this is one of the priorities for his government, but he was unable to do everything that he was thinking about because, as you mentioned, he was busy with fighting Daesh and liberating our cities and towns, and the environment, the overall environment, did not help him. He was also careful not to be accused that he is doing this or that because of the elections. He has a clear plan to continue with his measures that he started in order to deal with this issue as part of his overall plan to make our newly democratic institutions more effective, accountable, and able to use the limited resources that we have in order to continue with reconstruction and improving the health and education and the infrastructure that all the provinces need.
So, sir, given that Prime Minister Abadi and his partners didn't win, but also didn't lose categorically, I mean, it's not like those who did well overwhelmingly. Do you hope for some sort of consensus coalition that still eventually keeps Prime Minister Abadi as Prime Minister?
Certainly, this is the way forward. We do need to have at least 4 to 5 different blocs to come together and agree on a program for the next government and agree on the next Prime Minister. Among the listed possible candidates, Prime Minister Abadi continues to have the highest probability of being successful in establishing a coalition and forming the new government. He's also well trusted to lead the next government and continue his successes when it comes to strengthening security and national unity, as well as continue with his efforts as far as reconstruction and the development of the infrastructure and the key sectors of education and healthcare, in addition to building our regional and international relations in the way that the current government has done in the past 4 years.
Certainly. My final question to you, sir. Muqtada Al-Sadr, I know that he's unlikely to ever become Prime Minister as such, but would you be comfortable serving under his leadership?
Well, as you rightly indicated, it's unlikely that he would personally be the next Prime Minister. Indeed, he and other top religious scholars in Iraq have clearly indicated that they support a civilian government led by technocrats. As I said earlier, Prime Minister Abadi continues to be the most likely person to lead the next government. And we do hope that this process will not take long and we will have an all-inclusive more effective government that is more capable of dealing with the challenges that we have in Iraq and continue with the successes we had when it comes to building our relations with our neighbors and our friends in the region and around the world.
Ambassador Hisham Al-Alawi, I thank you very much for joining us here on the Newsmakers. Let's broaden out this discussion with our panelists. From Baghdad, we have Saad Al-Muttalibi. He's a member of Baghdad's local government with the ruling State of Law Coalition. In Washington, D.C., we have Douglas Ollivant. He's a managing partner of Manted International, a strategic consulting firm focused on Iraq. And from London, Anaset Tikriti, Chief Executive of the Cordoba Foundation, which aims to foster understanding between the Muslim world and the West. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us. Saad Al-Muttalibi, let me start with you. Muqtada al-Sadr of the Mahdi Army, that's the man who is potentially the kingmaker when it comes to the new government. Isn't that embarrassing to the current ruling government?
Yes, thank you very much. Well, this is politics, this is democracy. If he has gained the trust of the people and keep to the political system and the democratic way of governing, definitely it is a big setup for a set down for state of law. And for other political parties, of course, Hikmah, Mr. His Eminence Ammar al-Hakim also lost a great deal of seats. Everybody else lost seats. The only one who gained seats was Sairun, which is the bloc that belongs to Mr. Muqtada al-Sadr. But that is the decision of the people. We raised a new form of governing, which is to go back to the original democratic system of the rule of the majority, an Iraqi majority, not a sectarian majority. But the people chose to go with the present system, which is the consensual democracy, that everybody rules and everybody is in the opposition.
I mean, you're saying you raised something that is more democratic, but throughout, those who have been interviewed spoke about getting rid of the political elites. They were talking about you. They were talking about the current rulers. They wanted rulers who are closer to the streets. That could be the Sadrists, it could be the communists even, and those together. So you're part of the elites that they were talking about, the old school. They want you out.
Well, if they could do that democratically, that is perfectly correct and perfectly right. We have no objection on the choice of the people. If the people choose that the new government to be formed of the Communist Party and the extremist, Muslim extremists, then that is their choice. No objection on that whatsoever.
Okay. Anas Tikriti, you heard me speak to the Ambassador Hisham Al-Alawi a little bit earlier on. You're hearing what Saad Al-Muttalibi is saying now. Fold in your own thoughts with regards to this election and also give me your take on what they've had to say so far.
I think that these elections have been marked by a number of quite remarkable elements. The first is a low turnout. I heard how the ambassador mentioned the figure, the official figure, 44.5%, which is quite a respectable figure in even the best of democracies. But in reality, I think that the figure was far, far less. In fact, we have various areas and districts that saw less than even 20% turnout. So I think there was a low turnout, and I think that part of that was the fact that, as you mentioned to Mr. Al-Muttalibi, that people were sick and tired of the political system. There was and there is quite a large extent and quite a significant apathy. But also I think that the actual gains made by Sairun, led by Muqtada al-Sadr, is fairly remarkable. And also the fact that there were various Shia candidates and Shia-led lists that were voted in by large numbers in Sunni areas. That, I think, is for anyone who's looking for a glimmer of hope for Iraq, I think that that's something to look at. But on the downside, I believe that the element of the militias basically becoming part of the political structure, that is incredibly concerning, and I think that that bears quite bad news for the future of Iraq generally.
Okay, and I'll ask you what it means for the Sunnis in a few minutes' time, but I want to go to Doug Ollivant for the moment. Sairun, communists and Shias who are on the more fundamentalist side of things tied together or coming together in political coalition. Absolute nightmare for the Americans, right?
Well, it would be, but I think there's a very low chance of that actually happening. I think if the West generally, not just America, but Europe, looks at these elections, first I want to echo what everyone else has said. These are obviously real elections. If the elites were cooking the books on this election, this is not the result we would be seeing. This is not the Syrian election where the president gets 90%. So this is a real election, and that's an accomplishment, and we should just pause a second and recognize that. But moving to the results, at one level they are disappointing, but I think we also need to look at the big picture. Yes, the Sadrist trend won the most seats, but still only won about 16.5% of the total seats of the Iraqi parliament. They're going to have to put together a coalition, and whether they are, the lead party in that coalition is yet to be seen. Sure, would the West have preferred, and perhaps Iraqi elites have preferred, an election in which Prime Minister Abadi's victory list won 70 seats? I think all of us probably would have. But this is the reality we live in, and we can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. This is a good result that I think is going to result in a good government for Iraq. It's not going to be perfect. Iraq is not going to get fixed in the next year or the next 4 years. But this is a better result than we saw in 2014, a better result that we saw in 2010, I think, as far as getting Iraq on the right track moving forward.
Saad al-Muttalibi, given that both the Americans and the Iranians are a little bit worried about the results, isn't that a good thing for Iraqi sovereignty?
Well, we in state of law, our objection was to have a balanced relationship with the regional government and make sure to strengthen our relationship with the United States as an acknowledgement of the importance of having an excellent relations. We have a strategic agreement with the United States, and that strategic agreement means a lot to us and means a lot to the Shiite and the Sunnis and the Kurds, and we must take advantage of that to resolve some of the political issues in Iraq with the help of the United States. Unfortunately, now we have a picture that I cannot imagine what is going to happen. The communists and the Sadrists, who were the main opposition or the main militias that were taking part in fighting the Americans, now if they form a government, I have no idea how the international picture will become. Saying that, we have a lot of signs that indicating that the Sairun are more inclined to the Saudi position and anti-Iran. Now, this is a dangerous game. Iraq cannot be part of regional alliances. We cannot be against Saudi Arabia, and we cannot be against Iran or Turkey. Okay. Iraq is not in a position to become or to wage a proxy wars against our neighbors. We need to have a very stable, very balanced, very well-balanced relationship with our neighbors. We need Saudi Arabia, we need Iran, we need Egypt, even we need Syria and Turkey. We have to have a balanced relationship. Going to the extremist way, I think that will be damaging to Iraq and to the region. But might it more reasonable? Might it be, after all,
certainly, Mr. Al-Muttalibi, might it be a more reasonable interpretation that it's not that they want to damage ties with Iran, it's that they don't want to be controlled by Iran anymore, and there's a difference between the two.
There is no Iranian control in Iraq. This is a myth. This is definitely a myth, as the myth that Turkey controls Iraq or Saudi Arabia controls Iraq. Naturally, regional neighboring countries have good social and political relationship with Iraq. This is only natural, but that does not mean in any way that Iran controls me or controls Mr. Maliki or Mr. Alawi or Mr. Osama Nujayfi. This is a myth.
Okay.
Unfortunately, many people who made this myth believed it.
Okay, so Anas Tikriti, it's a myth that Iran controls Iraq to some extent at least, and what Mr. Al-Muttalibi is saying is that those new guys in Sairun, if they're going to drive this process forward, are going to wreck regional ties and cause problems. And let me then add to that, what does this mean for the Sunnis?
Well, I mean, I think that the way that Mr. Saad al-Mutallabi puts things, I only wish that that were true, and I only hope that that is what will become, because that would be an ideal situation for Iraq to be in. However, I think that it's slightly, well, it's quite untrue to say that Iran doesn't have a grip. Maybe not 100% control, no one is claiming that, but it has a firm grip on Iraqi affairs. It's only, you know, it's a well-known fact that the most important person in Iraq during the war on Daesh was Qasem Soleimani. That Iranian fighters were flooding, you know, Iraq in claiming that they were going to be part of that particular battle. But in any case, I mean, that's by the by. It's become a well-known fact. It's become part of Iraq's political life, unfortunately, for the past 15 years. So it's something that Iraqis have come to deal with one way or another. I also agree with Saad al-Mutallabi in terms of the danger of Iraq playing regional politics and siding by one particular element, such as Saudi Arabia, against another major player, such as Iran, or any other. But also to claim that Iraq hasn't played regional politics is also disingenuous, with all due respect. Iraq has clearly been on the side of Syria in its conflict against its own people. So in any case, I mean, I think that, you know, there are very good things and idealistic, proper things that Saad al-Mutallabi said, but I do think that there is a disparity with reality. Now, coming to the question that you asked regarding the Sunnis, bear in mind that these elections happened while still more than 2 million people were away from their own homes, whether it be in Diyala, in Salah ad-Din, in Anbar, as well as in Nainawa, particularly in Mosul. Most of those have no prospect of returning to their homes in the foreseeable future. Some might even claim or be in a situation whereby they should look forward to being in their refugee camps for the next probably 3, 4, 5 years even. So we have an incredible imbalance within Iraqi demographics as we speak, and the threat and the underlying issues which might then become overwhelming major issues in the near future, such as the rearing and the raising of a new generation of extremists one way or another, ideological, religious or whatever, is a serious prospect. The fact that more and more people are becoming totally apathetic as to the reality of Iraq as a one country is also a real prospect, and we must contend with that.
Okay, let me go to Doug then, and let me ask you, Doug, if they have a big headache, whether at the Pentagon or State Department or the White House now, with regards their Iraq policy while this new government gets formed. Given that, for example, Muqtada al-Sadr might be the kingmaker, the man that Lieutenant General Ricardo Sanchez in 2004 said of, quote, "The mission of the US forces is to kill or capture Muqtada al-Sadr. That's our mission." That man driving the process, big headache for the US government?
Well, that was 15 years ago, and people change and issues change, and you have to put some things behind you. So no, I don't think we have a major problem. Look, when the Sadrists went to celebrate their victory in Tahrir Square, they did not shout US out, they shouted Iran out. They saw the victory of the Sadrists, again, their 16% victory, their plurality victory, as being a vote against Iranian influence. You did not hear the US mentioned in their celebrations. So I think they are looking for balance in their relations, and whether it's a myth or not, they believe that Iran has too strong a hold on Iraq, and they're looking to change that. And to the extent that that favors the Saudis, who are a United States ally, that's great. The United States wants a neutral Iraq. We know that Iraq is never going to be an active participant in an anti-Iranian coalition. We know that. We want them to occupy a neutral ground. Now, of course, neutrality is in the eye of the beholder, but certainly the United States and the Gulf states think that Iraq leans a little closer, too close to Iran. If this election helps pull that back a little bit, we're all about that. We think this is a good result. Very quickly with the Sunnis, they're in a terrible place. 4 years ago, Iraq Sunnis were still, though politically disempowered, the cultural, economic, social elite of Iraq. 4 years under ISIS has changed that. Their cities are leveled. They've been living in IDP camps. Their kids haven't been getting educated. They've been subject to disease. They have suffered a huge blow. Reintegrating Iraq Sunnis in whatever place they find in Iraq will be a major challenge for the next government, as of course will be repairing relationships with the Kurdish provinces.
Okay, I'll let that be the final word. Douglas Ollivant, Anas Takriti and Saad Al-Mutalibi, pleasure getting all your thoughts. Thanks for joining us on the Newsmakers. Still to come on the Newsmakers, a string of terror attacks hits Indonesia. We ask how the country can tackle its security challenges. And people in Burundi vote on whether to extend their president's term limits. Will Pierre Nkurunziza stay on for another decade? It's been a devastating week in Indonesia, with the Southeast Asian nation facing a wave of attacks. On Monday, a family of 5 blew themselves up in front of a police station. A day before, another family attacked 3 churches, killing a dozen people. While terrorism isn't a new problem for Indonesia, many people fear this could be a sign that things are about to get a lot worse. For more, here's Christine Pirovalakis.
A wave of destructive terror has struck Indonesia, with children used in a string of suicide bombings. On Monday, a family of 5 drove motorcycles to police headquarters in the country's second-largest city of Surabaya and detonated bombs.
Pagi hari ini baru saja juga terjadi lagi bom bunuh diri di Surabaya lagi. Ini adalah tindakan pengecut, tindakan yang tidak bermartabat, tindakan yang biadab.
A day earlier, another family of 6 carried out suicide bombings on 3 Catholic churches in the same town. 12 people died in those attacks, which happened within minutes of each other. That family had split up across separate locations. The father detonated a car bomb. His 2 teenage sons used a motorcycle for their attack, and the mother and her 2 young daughters wore explosives in theirs. In all, they killed 22 civilians and police officers. It's the deadliest attack since 2002, when more than 200 people were killed in the Bali bombings.
Our sense of humanity is distorted, because for us, all acts of terror have no place here.
Hours after the church attacks, a woman and her child were killed in a bomb explosion, and their father shot dead by police in a raid on their apartment. Police say the family had been making bombs for another attack, and believe all 3 families were part of the same cell of Jama' Ansharud Dawla. That's a local terror group that's declared loyalty to Daesh. And Daesh has claimed responsibility not only for the attacks in Surabaya, but also for one on a police station on the island of Sumatra, carried out by a group of men carrying machetes. Daesh also says it was behind a prison riot that left 5 guards dead just days before the wave of bombings. For nearly 2 decades, Indonesia has suffered domestic terrorism. The resort island of Bali has been bombed twice. Terror groups have also attacked 2 luxury hotels and a Starbucks in central Jakarta. In recent years, officials have cracked down on militants and made hundreds of arrests. The government has also introduced a de-radicalization program for families of terrorists who've served prison sentences. But many people are concerned the country is now facing a renewed threat from fighters returning home from Iraq and Syria. Officials say the coordinated nature of the recent bombings in Indonesia suggests a sophisticated level of planning, and one that signals a darker future of growing domestic extremism for Indonesia. Christine Pirovalakis, The Newsmakers.
Well, to discuss this from Prague, we have Rakian Adibrata. He's an advisor to the Indonesian government and an anti-terrorism expert. And in Jakarta, we have Shoaib Kagda. He's a journalist and founder of the Indonesia Economic Forum. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. Rakian, let me begin with you. So we have this special unit the elite unit, Special Detachment 88 or Densus 88, that has foiled a number of plots. And then we have those that have slipped through the net, suicide bombings, people attacking police officers and so forth, churches. How big and how dangerous is Indonesia's extremism problem as things stand?
Well, now comparing with the last 1 decade ago, when Jemaah Islamiyah exists, it's totally uncomparable with this time. The terrorism right now in Indonesia has increased in more larger attack, and the possibility of creating more terror will be much bigger comparing like 10 years ago.
And Shuaib, for those who believe that the solution is
Yes.
to pass stricter security laws, are they right?
So I do believe that there is a need to pass stricter security laws, but I also believe that the country's intelligence organizations and intelligence apparatus needs to have a much better understanding of what is happening on the ground.
Okay, so Rakian, why doesn't the government have a better understanding of what's happening on the ground? Why does this continue to emerge?
Well, honestly, the government understands the current threat, and that's why the Indonesian government is pushing the parliaments in revising the 13-year-old bill on counterterrorism. The old bill is totally outdated, and we have a lack of legal framework. It's a good tool in fighting against Jemaah Islamiyah, but it's not a good tool to combating ISIS, and that's why we are revising it. But you know, during the revisions, a couple of attacks already happened, and the government is pushing the parliaments to make sure it's going to be passed by this month.
Okay, Shuaib, help me understand the differences between the various local groups and their affiliations to the international groups. So you have Jamaah Ansharud Dawla or Jamaah Ansharud Tawheed as well, local groups, and then you have them sort of pledging allegiance to Daesh or ISIS, you have Al-Qaeda elements. Tell me what's the fundamental issue and the fundamental difference between these various groups?
The homegrown terrorist organizations, I think, maybe take their cues from the Islamic State or some of the other organizations in the Middle East. But you know, Indonesia is a complex country. There are many, many different organizations within Islam, within Indonesia. Of course, you have the larger organizations like Muhammadiyah and which are well recognized, but beneath them and below them, there are thousands of different individual Islamic schools, pesantrens, we call them here. They have their own kind of communities, which are really very difficult to monitor what is being taught in these schools. There are independent preachers who have their own ideology, who sometimes preach maybe a different version of Islam. So, you know, and having an understanding of this complexity on the ground, when I say on the ground, you need to have a better understanding of what is being preached, who are the preachers, where are they preaching. These are the issues that I think is beyond just the security umbrella that is definitely needed. But beyond that, the intelligence gathering needs to be a lot more sophisticated. We cannot just blame, for example, in the latest incidents in Surabaya, it was one family. Are they directly connected to any of the so-called Islamic radical groups in the Middle East? We don't know. Right. And we have no idea why this family was radicalized. How were they radicalized? Yep. We have no idea. I think it's too simplistic to say that, oh, you know, the father had some connections to Syria. I think that's too simplistic. A family does not blow itself up just like that. Yeah. I think there is a need to seriously look at this situation.
Let me bring in Rakian here because Shuaib mentioned schools. I want to ask you, Rakian, about prisons as well. So by the latest count and by the available information that I got, Indonesia, about 500 prisons and more than 250,000 inmates. As far as I understand, a lot of people who are banged up for extremism in prison are heroes in prison. They take a lot of visitors, people like Abu Bakr Bashir and others. And that there's a theory that people are getting radicalized within your prison system? Is that something you're looking at?
Well, that's one of the main problems that we face right now. Dealing with terrorism inmates is quite problematic. If you put them together in one block cell, they will regrouping. But if you put them together with regular inmates, they will start recruiting. We have around 270 terrorism inmates spread across around 80 penitentiary or prisons in Indonesia. Well, on the same time, the super maximum security prisons existed in Indonesia is just only less than 1 dozen. So you can imagine most of them are being located in not so maximum security prisons. So that's one of the problems that we face.
Shoaib, for those who say it's about ideology only, or for those who say it's about people and their crummy lives only, which one is closer to the truth when it comes to radicalization?
I think there is a combination of the two, but I feel that it's closer to ideology. Indonesia is there's still a large segment of the population, about 12% that lives below the poverty rate. But I do not think that poverty is the main issue here. I think it's ideology and the fact that they can be easily radicalized. How they're being radicalized is to me is a great concern, because it's not that easy for a ordinary family or an ordinary community or an ordinary citizen to suddenly become a mass murderer. Mm-hmm. There is a tipping point in that process, and I think this is where the government must work together with religious leaders, must work together with psychologists, must work together with schools to find a way to understand what's going on. Why are these people doing what they're doing? I don't think it's just poverty.
Yeah, undoubtedly there's a problem, and it's going to be interesting to see how Indonesia copes in the months and years to come. For the moment, I have to move on, but I thank you both for giving us a deeper understanding of the issue in Indonesia. Rakyan Adibrata and Shoaib Kagda, thanks for joining us on the Newsmakers.
We also take this opportunity to call on all the people who are of voting age to do their civic duty and present themselves at the polling stations.
Pierre Nkurunziza has been Burundi's president for more than a decade. His re-election bid in 2015 led to violent protests that resulted in the deaths of more than 1,200 people. But that isn't stopping him from trying to stay in power. Burundi is holding a referendum to amend the constitution. If approved, it would extend the presidential term from 5 to 7 years, potentially allowing Nkurunziza to remain in power till 2034. But critics of the former rebel leader are far from impressed. They accuse him of trying to steal power. Well, joining me today from the Burundian capital, Bujumbura, is Evelyn Maniragaba. She's the senior advisor to Burundi's first vice president. In Washington, D.C., we have Karine Kaneza Nantulia. She's a spokeswoman for the Women and Girls Movement for Peace and Security in Burundi. And completing our panel from Ottawa, we have Audace Gatavu. He's a human rights lawyer and activist from Burundi, currently living in exile in Canada. I thank you all for joining us. Evelyn, can I begin with you, ma'am? We look at what the international organizations are saying. Human Rights Watch, detailing more than a dozen cases of intimidation at the hands of the ruling party's Youth League in the build-up to the referendum. Amnesty International as well. It comes after the UN Human Rights Council have also said that crimes against humanity have been committed by the government. There's a refugee crisis, 400,000 people on the move. How can we expect a free and fair referendum with all of this in mind?
Yes, thank you for, first of all, inviting me at this discussion. First of all, I would like to mention to you that today, since this morning, the referendum vote is going well all over the country. There is not any reported incident, and by now, almost 90% of the people who have registered to vote have already cast their vote. So now some members of the international community, Human Rights Watch, have been saying that there's been some intimidations against who? I really don't understand, because since this campaign started, we've seen all the people, those who were against it, they've been campaigning, they've been having their own rallies, even in the cities, in town, freely. And those who are for it have been also campaigning for it. So what I can say is people who are saying that in Burundi there's intimidation from the Youth League. It's not the first time that we hear those kind of rhetorics. It has been said since 2015, even before. They have been accusing the youth from the ruling party of all sorts of crimes. What I can say is that everyone who, during this referendum or before, has committed any crime has been arrested and punished according to the national law.
Okay, Evelyn, thanks for that. Karine, let me come to you now. You heard what Evelyn had to say. Does it sound reasonable?
No, it sounds logical, because on behalf of the Women's and Girls Movement for Peace and Security, we hold no surprise in terms of the current rhetoric of the regime in Bujumbura. Let me just first say by saying that today for us and for every Burundian who's not in Burundi right now, and also for those who are inside Burundi, we would like to extend our condolences, our sympathy and our solidarity towards those who have gone voting against their will, those who have paid the ultimate price for this referendum to be held, and for those who paid an ultimate price, including members of the regime in place, for the 2005 constitution to be drafted. Let's remember again that the referendum, as it is being described by my my compatriot in Burundi, is literally dismantling what brought peace in Burundi. So that is the first thing. As what she said, I believe that she said something about no incident being occurring in Burundi, and etc., etc. I think there is nothing I can add to that, besides the fact that the current regime is under an international criminal investigation. We have 9 mass graves that have been uncovered since 2015. We have countless numbers of refugees outside of the country. This referendum is a mockery, I think, in terms of democracy.
Okay, so let me bring in Audace.
And decency, and just simple political decency.
Okay, so let me bring in Audace.
Thank you.
Audace, if the people in this referendum vote to give Nkurunziza more power and more longevity, would you accept it and recognize it?
I would not accept it, neither recognize it, because this referendum is conducted in a context that is, I can say, unconstitutional, because the current constitution set guidelines and describe an environment in which a revision of the constitution can be conducted, and it's clear in the constitution that when the revision is not a consensus of all the population, and when it is not conducted in a way that respects the peace and security in the country, it cannot be done. So it's unconstitutional, and it violates the Arusha agreement, and
so let me take
quite
that.
all the roles, because
we got your point of view there. Let me take that and pose it to Evelyn. It violates the Arusha agreement, the Peace and Reconciliation Agreement of 2000. That's being ripped up. The very thing that's holding this country together is being ripped up, according to the 2 others. They say this is unconstitutional, there's no consensus, and people are voting against their will. As a representative of government, tell me why you think they're wrong.
Yes, first of all, I would like to talk about the Arusha Agreement, because the basis of Arusha Agreement was about sharing power between all the ethnic groups. And for the current constitution, I mean, the one that has been voted today, it doesn't change the quota of ethnic sharing of power. It doesn't touch that aspect, and that is the very, very basic of the Arusha Agreement. That is number one. And number two, to say that it is not the right time, or we don't have the right conditions to conduct a referendum, I think that is wrong, because in the Constitution itself, the 2005 Constitution, there is an article that says that the Constitution shall be amended. And there are conditions, like my brother there said that there are conditions that must be respected. And for now, he didn't show me which condition is not respected. And because the first condition is the people must agree with it. That is why the referendum is happening, so that the people himself can express their will. No one has been forced to go for a vote. If you were here in Burundi, you could have seen everyone came from their houses, youth, old men. No one was pushing nobody, because they know it's their right and they can vote yes or no. The ballot is secret. No one will know what you have voted. Okay, so let's wait for the result. And
okay, let me get responses then from Karine Kaneza Nantulia and Odas. Let me start with you, Karine. Karine, your response?
Thank you. My response is very simple. The Arusha Peace Accords had absolutely nothing, and I repeat, nothing, to do with the ethnicity inside the country. They had to do with what you would call inclusive politics. The spirit of Arusha, and I think this is very important, the spirit of Arusha was basically crafted into four things which have been dismantled by the current referendum and the new constitution, the so-called new constitution. It was the qualified majority representation, proportional representation, the vetoes, and the thresholds, which are not represented in the new constitution. That is the first thing. The second thing is the drafters of the Arusha Peace Accords held a very important opinion, which you see throughout the entire document, which was the repeated practice of inclusive politics would at the end erode ethnicity. Now, what do we see with the new constitution? The one that my sister is talking about. We see the consolidation of power within one man. We see the erosion of every minority group's proportionality and representation within the new structures that will evolve from that constitution. But we also see something very important, I think. We see the fact that when she talks about the votes do not mean anything in Burundi anymore. And I think that is the danger. There is a checklist that the current regime is using, and I've always said that. There's a checklist. People are going on the streets, regardless of the fact that at night you have people harassing them, regardless of the fact that a few days ago we had 27 countrymen and women and children being killed. Let us remember, and I'm talking to my sister actually, let us remember that we've had so far in Burundi, in the political history of Burundi, 2 peaceful votes. 2 peaceful elections, the one of 1961 and the one of 2005. History teaches us that Burundi has a history of violence, has a history of exclusionary politics that is only being basically recrafted and relieved through this referendum. And those are facts. We know it. We are 3 Burundians on this call, and we know it. So let us just talk about the rhetoric of the government, but we have to be honest.
Okay, we're watching Burundi closely. We hope to have all of you back on the program in the not too distant future. Karine, Odas, and Evelyn, I thank you all for joining us here on the Newsmakers.
We appeal because there was a miscarriage of justice. We appeal because there was travesty of justice. We appeal because there was clear conspiracy to condemn me, assassinate my political character.
He is a political prisoner. This was a politically motivated trial. And if he did not lead the opposition to win up to 52% of popular support last elections, he would not perhaps live his life in incarceration today.
And that's all for this edition of The Newsmakers with me, Imran Garda. You can check out more of our stories on YouTube, Facebook and Twitter. Remember to like, follow and subscribe. Until next time, thank you for watching. Bye-bye.